Well, let's finish up John chapter 13. Jesus has decided to show the full extent of his love. And so he washes his apostles' feet. And then he predicts the betrayal of Judas. Even identifies him as the one who will do it. And he goes so far as to telling Judas to go ahead and take care of business. What you are about to do, do it quickly, Jesus said. And it said that just as soon as Jesus handed him the bread and he took it, that the devil entered into him and he left. He went out and it was night. Then Jesus turns and predicts the betrayal or the denial of Peter. Peter, as you say in Zimbabwe. Verse 31. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself and will glorify him at once." When we speak about Jesus being glorified, what we're talking about is his death, his burial, and his resurrection. And so it said, as soon as Judas was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is going to be glorified through him. And if God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son himself. And he'll do it at once." So Jesus was saying this glorification's coming. I'm not sure the disciples understood what Jesus is saying. But in the next verse, verse 33, he calls them his children. He says, "My children, I'll be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you, where I am going, you cannot come." And we remember, we've already seen this, that Jesus, when he was preaching to the Jews, told them, "I'm going someplace you can't come." And they were questioning, well, where's he going to go? Is he going to go and preach to the Jews that are dispersed all around the Roman Empire? Is he going to die? I mean, what's going to happen that he's going to go someplace that we can't go? And Jesus is telling them here, not in direct terms, that he's going to die. But he said, "I'm only going to be with you a little while longer." That's pretty plain. I'm not sure they understood it. But he said, "You'll look for me and you won't find me, because where I'm going you can't go." But in verse 34 he says, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So Jesus was going. They wouldn't see him anymore. They couldn't follow him wherever it was he was going. And so he gives them a commandment. Jesus says it's a new commandment. Jesus has been talking about love all the time. But he says this new commandment is to love one another as I have loved you. You must love one another. Loving one another is one thing. Saying you love one another is one thing. But loving one another the way that Christ loved us is a big love. That's a willingness to give up everything that you have, all the position that you have, give up everything that you have, and then die for someone. That's love. And that's what Jesus tells them. Love one another as I have loved you. And he said, this is the way people will know that you're my disciples. Back in Jesus' day, he wasn't the only rabbi. There were a lot of Jewish rabbis, and their disciples would follow them around. And the disciples of the Jewish rabbis always wanted to be identified with that rabbi. If you'll remember, Saul of Tarsus was a disciple of the Rabbi Gamaliel, one of the greatest rabbis of the day. And you could tell a disciple of a certain rabbi because they looked like that rabbi, they dressed like that rabbi, they would handle themselves the same way the rabbi handled himself. And here Jesus is saying it's not going to be by the way you dress that people are going to know you're my disciples. It's not going to be by the way you talk that people are going to know you're my disciples. He said, by this all men will know you're my disciples if you love one another. And that's still how we know a disciple of Jesus, if they love one another. Well, in verse 36, Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? You know, Jesus had just laid this big new commandment on him to love one another. And Simon Peter's mind is still caught back on what Jesus said about, I'm going somewhere that you can't come. And so Simon Peter asks him, where are you going? Jesus replied, well, where I'm going, you can't follow now, but you'll follow later. And we know that Jesus was going to die. He was going to be buried. He would rise again and ascend into heaven. And we know that one day Peter would follow Jesus. He would come later. But Peter says in verse 37, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I'll lay down my life for you. I think Peter was saying, I love you. I'll do anything for you. Why can't I follow you? Why can't I come with you? I'd be willing to die for you. And so Jesus told him in verse 38, will you really lay down your life for me? I tell you the truth, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And so Peter, just sure of himself that he would follow Jesus, he would lay down his life for Jesus, and Jesus knows. Jesus knows what's going to happen, and he tells him, Peter, before the rooster crows in the morning, you're going to deny knowing me 3 times. All right, that's chapter 13. Give me a preaching point, a few sentences about that preaching point. Send it to my inbox in WhatsApp. God bless.